Let's do a little reading today. So this is a book that is near and dear to my heart. It is They Became What They Beheld. It was written by Edmund Snow Carpenter. The photography by Ken Heyman. It's an astute staccato comment on present and needed changes in sensory modes against a background of fancified, primitive life, annotated by some extraordinary photographs by anthropologist Margaret Mead. Carpenter is one of those rare anthropologists who understand that the study of man is not based on matching, but making. And he makes sense. Marshall McLuhan. "Oh, what a beautiful baby." "That's nothing," the mother replied. "You should see his photograph." Through text and photography, They Became What They Beheld brings into vivid focus the changed sense of self and world that now marks modern life, most expressively in the young. Why long hair? Why the turn to drugs and the inner trip? But the changes do not only affect the young, but they are part of all of us. Why the new intense concern with fashion? Why the rapid expansion of the old limits of what was proper? Why that gap that divides the generations? Daddy, are we live or on tape? The book takes form of a notebook, of images and commentaries juxtaposed in dramatic contrast and continuities. Its rhythms are more concentrated and more violent than those experienced in conventional work. They belong to the world of icon, graffiti, cartoon, our world. The tribal man who walks through these pages is composed like the Bride of Frankenstein, of bits and pieces from many sources. He cannot be found in any nearby jungle or tundra or city, but lives in a more remote land, in company with savages of Rousseau and Detroit. So I recently came across the following rules of communication, posted in the School of Journalism. Know your audience and address yourself directly to it. Know what you want to say and say it clearly and fully. Reach the maximum audience by utilizing existing channels. Whatever sense this may have made in the world of print makes no sense today. In fact, the reverse of each rule applies. If you address yourself to an audience, you accept at the outset the basic premise that unite the audience. You put on the audience, repeating cliches familiar to it. But artists don't address themselves to audiences. They create audiences. The artist talks to himself out loud. If what he has to say is significant, others hear and are affected. The trouble with knowing what to say and saying it clearly and fully is that clear speaking is generally obsolete thinking. Clear statement is like an art object. It is the afterlife of the process, which is called into being. The process itself is the significant step, and especially at the beginning, it is often incomplete and uncertain. Columbus's maps were vague and sketchy, but showed the right continent. The problem with full statement is that it doesn't involve. It leaves no room for participation. It's addressed to consumer, not co-producer. Alan Capro posted a few small posters about Berkeley. Suppose you were interested in designing a primer, in mixed with media, etc. Alan Capro will be in Berkeley in July and August. No phone, no address, no dates, terms. He found, however, that those who wanted to work with him and those he wanted to work with located him without difficulty. Reaching the maximum audience may be the last thing one wants to achieve. George Segal says, If I don't give myself to everybody, I give myself very intensely to my work. My wife, my kids, my few friends, I can't begin to give myself indiscriminately to all. It's the only thing that makes me pause about, say, Ginsberg's preachings on universal love, or even California ideas on echelon and touching. Utilizing existing channels can wipe out a statement. There is a widely accepted misconception that media merely serves as a neutral packages for the dissemination of raw facts. Photographers once thought that by getting their photographs published in Life magazine, they would thereby reach large audiences. Gradually, they discovered that the only message that came through was Life magazine itself, and that their pictures had become but bits and pieces of that message. Unwittingly, they contributed to a message far removed from the one they intended. The same thing occurs on TV guest shows. Guests accept invitations to appear on programs in the hopes that their message will reach new and wider audiences. But even when they are treated in a friendly manner, they generally come away with a sense of failure. Somehow the message transmitted is far removed from the message intended. The original message has been declassified by an alien medium. "Oh, what a blow that phantom gave me," cries Don Quixote. The young today shun the hardware of the past. Marx thought the big question was, who owns the presses? The software makes hardware obsolete, an encumbrance, creating a false sense of power and security. The young package their messages in media that fit their messages. That is, they create new media. To fit their messages, and in doing so, they create their own audiences. Some of those audiences may be very small at the beginning. In Houston, I met filmmakers producing films for audiences of no more than 6. But the point was that they would reach the right people in the right way with the right message. It is one of the curiosities of a new medium, a new format, that at the moment that it first appears, it's never valued, but it is believed. What it offers, I believe, is a sudden insight to unexpected glimpses into a reality that, at most, was merely suspected, but never before seen with such clarity. Like gorillas, the young are in favored position. They don't need or want the hardware and audiences of yesterday. Dislocations only connect, the rest is silence. As it was in the beginning, is now and ever shall be, world without end. Contemporary art was born out of the urge for elemental expression. The artist plunged into the depths of human experience. A real inner affinity suddenly appeared between the longings of the man today and the longings of primeval man, crystallized in signs and symbols on the cavern walls. S. Gideon. This notebook of juxtaposed images and explorations is organized around correspondences between certain pre-literate and post-literate experiences to convey the essence of these experiences to a contemporary audience. In the idiom of our day, I felt it necessary to find literary expressions consonant with the experiences themselves. The rhythms practiced here are heightened, concentrated, and frequently more violent than those found in more conventional texts. They belong in the world of icon and graffiti, in music and cartoon and lie closer, I believe, to the original experiences. These rhythms include interval with abrupt interface and repeat of cliche with slight variation, a technique made familiar by Andy Warhol and common with common to much tribal art. In the 1960s, people spoke of dropping out. No more dropping out, like suicide, involved a choice. Now there's no choice. The system itself has dropped out. Human evolution began in South Africa, not when apes descended from the trees, but when the trees themselves disappeared and arboreal skills became obsolete. The electronic media created a new environment, rendering obsolete the patterns, which literate man codified as reality. Suddenly, all information, freed from classifications which had long bound it, became raw data, available to everyone simultaneously via electronic media. Out of this vastly confusing wealth, each of us is forced to create his own environment that is programmed into his psychic and sensory life. To this end, we turn to the arts, for only artists, and maybe criminals, create their own lives. To live outside the law, you must be honest, says Bob Dylan. And I'll go to jail before I break the law, says a bumper sticker. The name is the numb. When a cop writes down your name, he takes you over. As long as information is classified in content, medium, audience, it's restricted and controlled. But changing any one of these three declassifies it. And the moment it's declassified, all its resources become available to everyone and can be used for new ends. At this point, communication becomes possible. And by communication, I mean redistribution of knowledge, not simply between knower and not knower, but ultimately within the intelligence itself. If we accept the idea that communication automatically excludes the familiar and predictable, then most so-called communication media are grossly mislabeled. Everything in Reader's Digest is either familiar or predictable to all its readers. That's why they subscribe. Last month's issue is identical with this month's issue. If you've seen them all, you've seen one. What you've seen is a particular format. And once having experienced that, you know it. Repeating it merely establishes it as cliche. It's like an Anglican sermon that confirms you in all previous convictions. Such convictions are public, shared alike by all subscribers. Publishing them means putting on the audience. It repeats that audience to itself. Newspapers are mirrors, and a few even call themselves that. They reflect their readers. The repeat of cliche is closer to incantation than to communication. Some years ago, I came across a book entitled Plots That Sell to Top-Paying Magazines, which outlined the stories each national magazine accepted. Henry Miller tells how in hard times he looked at back issues of magazines, rewrote their stories, and submitted those to the editors who accepted them, of course. Most journals, newspapers, TV shows, etc. merely repeat cliches, and real cliches they repeat are their own formats. As cliches, they become environmental, and hence unseen. Cyril Connolly once complained that several years after he stopped publishing Horizons, contributors were still submitting articles. In the novel Jean Barnes, the founder and editor of a small but once influential magazine, continues to publish long after his magazine has had any effects. He finally runs an experiment for 3 months. He fails to send copies to 20 charter subscribers. Though their subscriptions are paid up, not one of them notices. About 15 years ago, someone checked the circulation of a well-known university quarterly. He found that out of its 700 odd subscribers, less than 35 were non-institutional, and most of these were elderly alumni or department heads. He arranged to have several libraries place current and back issues on reserve. No one checked them out. Year after year, articles were typed, read, edited, sent in, proofread, set in type, proofread, printed, mailed, cataloged, even bound, but when life was young, it succeeded in communicating a new format. Or when Life magazine was young, it succeeded in communicating a new format, a new way of perceiving and classifying experience. It created its own audience by changing people. But in doing so, it fused imperceivably with the very environment it helped create. Its format, once startling, became an unseen cliche. Both Collier's and the Sunday Evening Post died at the peak of their circulations. Life and Time have never had large circulations, yet both are in financial difficulty. Advertisers feel that products advertised in them tend to disappear into the unseen environment where perception and awareness are muted. No environment is perceptible because it saturates the whole field of attention. One can perceive only after alienation. And one can perceive it only after alienation. After some degree of alienation, I can swallow the saliva in my mouth because it's me, but I can't swallow it if I put it in a glass. So long as I transact with my environment, my ecological whole, I can't perceive it. It doesn't even environ me. It's an extension of me, and I can't smell myself. Declassification. When you classify anything, you make it available for new classification. That is, for the production and distribution of new knowledge. Congestion says, McLawn, is the indispensable prelude to getting your hand in the other guy's pocket. Congestion is the indispensable prelude to getting your hand in the other guy's pocket. As McLawn points out, every breakdown is a potential breakthrough. And the 1929 crash revealed the economic structure to the entire community. The breakdown of segregation revealed the nature of racism. The generation gap revealed the nature of identity. Obsolescence. Every time you put a new technology around a society, the old technology becomes a junkyard. But from junkyards become new art. New art can be made by retrieving and reshaping junk. Yeats, after searching widely for the components of new art, finally found them, he tells us, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. One touch of nature makes the whole world kin. That all with one consonant praise, newborn guards. Through they are made and molded of things past, and give to dust that is little glit. More laud than glit, oedursted. Troilus and Cressida, 3 and 3. Picasso assembled his famous bull's head sculpture from parts of a wrecked bicycle. Out of the handlebars and the bicycle seat, I made the bull's head, which everybody recognized as a bull's head. Thus, a metamorphosis was completed, and now I would look to see another metamorphosis take place in the opposite direction. Suppose my bull's head is thrown back on the scrap heap. Perhaps someday some fellow will come along and say, well, there's something that would come in very handy for the handlebars of my bicycle. In the trash heap, you can see true forms because everything is declassified. It's found art world. It's a found art world. A bright new chrome Ford can only be driven in certain areas, in certain ways, for certain purposes. But as junk, it's declassified, and all its potentials, hitherto largely concealed by specialization, become accessible to artists. Any junkyard is potentially an alchemist's kitchen, a poet's scrapbook. The Golden Burrow, all junk, become a source book for poets and writers. What goes into an addict as useless may be brought back out as art. Trash and treasures, a sign on a New York shop, serve to remind us that these two aren't necessarily opposites. Every age has its great poem, and that poem is a culture's junkyard. The Iliad, the wasted land. The anthropologist is the old rag and bone man of the world, a title, in fact, conferred by Naskapi Indians on the great ethnologist Frank Speck. Rubbing faces between two worlds in a continuous parallel releases archetypes. Cliché is whatever is in use, and whatever is in use is environmental, hence largely invisible. The moment a new cliché arises to surround it, the old cliché becomes useless. Hence, very visible, art is often shaped out of the useless archetypes coming from junkyards. They are obsolete clichés, rearview mirrors. The wealth and resources of any language or technology become accessible to artists when that language or technology is rendered obsolete by a new form. The Renaissance used Latin and the classics as art sources. Americans have long treated the whole of Europe and Asia as collectors' junkyards. Electronic media have turned the entire globe into a midden. Artists are now busy transforming all of our yesterdays into now. The whole world has become a happening. We might liken it to disarmament and demobilization of an army. Materials and talents hitherto restricted to specific tasks can now be applied in vastly expanded ways. The visible past. The old environment is easier to perceive than the present environment because no one is really involved in it. When industrialization blackened Leeds and Manchester, creating this dark, satanic land, lake poets went in search of pastoral pleasures, and Wordsworth sang of childhood joys. Classicism served as counterpoint to the Renaissance technology. Romanticism to mechanization, and tribalism to electrification, constructed to counter situations. They provide a means of direct attention. Like utopias, they served as anti-environments, enabling one to perceive with detachment and clarity. Henry Ford used profits from his Rogue River assembly plant to create Dearborn Village, filled with churns, spinning wheels, and other remnants of cottage handcraft. Each new development marks an art form of the past. Rome was orientated towards Greece. The Renaissance was orientated towards Rome. The American industrialists collected Renaissance paintings. The Museum of Modern Art is really a period piece. In its initial stages, every new medium takes as its content the medium it has just rendered obsolete. Scribes recorded oral legends. Printers set in type old manuscripts. Hollywood filmed books. Radio broadcast concerts in vaudeville. TV showed old movies. Magnetic tapes Magnetic tape was used to copy LP records. Content in art is often no more than obsolete art serving as facade for new art or new technology. The content of much Renaissance art was the Bible, but its effects derived primarily from a single perspective or private point of view, which was the visual counterpoint of the notion of individualism. Both were byproducts of writing and the new technology of print. Each new environment makes the old one visible. What is psychic becomes explicit only after it becomes obsolete. The present environment is never seen. We repeat its laws without being conscious of them. We are conscious only of the obsolete, and we value it because it appears manageable, subject to conscious control. This makes it splendidly attractive. The history of European art is a succession of schools and styles replacing one another as new technologies are created, new ways of perceiving and being, and new ways of perceiving and being created new technologies. Perceptual modes became visible as soon as they became obsolete. They served as the content of each new environment. I doubt the same principle operates nearly so clearly in tribal societies. Such societies were highly stable, at least in comparison to Western ones, and among them, the dichotomy between the invisible present and the visible past seems less clear. Oscar Wilde says, "The true mystery of the world is the visible, not the invisible." The Islander. John Colkin says, "We don't know who discovered water, but we're certain it wasn't a fish." It's the outsider who sees the environment. The islander sees the outline of the distant mainland, and when he goes ashore, he commands, for he alone sees form and process. Yeats, Joyce, Shaw from Ireland, Eliot from Missouri, Pound from Idaho were innovators of the 20th century English. Beaverbrook from the Maritimes, Luce from the missionary family in China, Thomson from the Ontario bush became the giants of the 20th century publishing. Detachment and perspective permit pattern recognition. In histories of most people, there occur long lapses during which they lie creatively fallow. Western European man was late by a millennium or so in adding anything to ancient culture. The Jews, between the desperation and their emergence from the ghettos, did nothing that a historian of art and thought could not cover in a long footnote. When they re-entered the world, the Jews, as though seeing for the first time the structure of those piecemeal growth that they had contributed almost nothing, produced within a century a series of epic innovations. Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, and scores of hardly less original. Kafka, for example. The reemergence of the Islamic peoples, when complete, may give us the same kind of consolation. A.J. Lindbergh. Liebling. A.J. Liebling. Sorry. The wide-eyed wonder of the child. All discovery is accident or error. Ignorance and inadequacies leave openings for errors and therefore discoveries. No experts need apply. The phrase organized ignorance seems to have arisen during World War II, when operations When operations research people put biologists and psychologists to work on weapons problems that would ordinarily have fallen to a lot of engineers and physicists, the former group had all the fresh and wide-eyed wonder of children. They swarmed all over each problem. Instead of beaming a ray of specialized knowledge at it. If you beam knowledge at a subject, you find it quite opaque. If you organize your ignorance, attacking the situation as an overall project, probing all aspects at the same time, you find unexpected apertures, vistas, and breakthroughs. Thus, the chemist Mendeleev, to discover the missing link in the element chart, did not simply use available knowledge. Instead, he asked, what must be the characteristics of the rest? And if those we do know, start over there. So thus the chemist Mendeleev, to discover the missing link in the element chart, did not simply use available knowledge. Instead, he asked, what must be the characteristics of the rest? If those we do know are to make sense among themselves, organized ignorance can be a great asset when approaching the unfamiliar. It was this approach of non-preconception that enabled the filmmaker Robert Flaherty to discover forms hidden from conventional view. Non-preconception is the precondition to discovery, because it's a state of mind. When you do not preconceive, then you go about finding out. There is nothing else you can do. You begin to explore. All art, says Flaherty, is kind of exploring. To discover and reveal is the way that the artist sets about his business. Flaherty didn't begin with a script or point of view, but let the camera see everything. Avid as a child and filled with childlike wonder. He did more. He called out forms that the camera found hidden there. For it requires a creative human act before the world explored becomes a world revealed. All truths lie waiting in all things, wrote Whitman. They unfold themselves more fragrant than roses living from buds. Whenever you fetch the spring sunshine moistened with summer rain, but it must be in yourself. It shall come from your soul. It shall be love. Discovering. Truth will not stand or stay or keep. It is neither new or not at all. Norman O'Brien. The young were attracted to Eugene McCarthy when he spoke out, but they were turned off by Robert Kennedy's hesitancy. Robert Watts, in creating Happenings, found that happenings announced far in advance were ignored or forgotten. Participants were drawn to them when they saw them about to happen or even beginning to happen. The young are indifferent to old truths, which are dead, or the possessions of others. And they are indifferent to future truths, which are too remote for identity. For them, the act of discovering is primary and personal. It is that moment of inception, quivering with life and uncertainty, vital, subjective. To them, truth equals discovering. A new form always seems to be more or less an absence of any form at all, since it is unconsciously judged by reference to consecrated forms, says Robert Gillett. Recognition of any new form is greatly delayed by idle responses of mere like or dislike, satisfaction or alarm. These postures delay any understanding of the real character and function of any new form. Specialists don't welcome discovery. They welcome only new proofs of what they already know. Discovery is an unrepeatable. All specialists understand that discoveries are fatal to the stockpile of their unclassified data. Discovery makes the field of the specialist obsolete. Though we all know, we often forget that the existence of America was one of the greatest disappointments in the history of Europe. Plans laid and hardships borne in the hopes of reaching Cathay merely ushered in a period during which we became to America what the Huns had become to us. C.S. Lewis. The smell of newness. Children shudder at the smell of newness as a dog does when it scents a hare. Isabel Babel. Lionel Trilling tells how Robert Warshaw gave a toy outgrown by his own son to Trilling's son. It was a magnificent fortress with battlements and a drawbridge and a considerable complete complement of rather splendid lead soldiers. Everything was in excellent condition. Nothing was lacking to make it a fine present. But Warshaw had added a brand new box of grenaders. He explained, when we protested this extravagance, that to a boy it would not have been a present unless there was something new. It would have been a thing given, but not a present. The gardener in England, writes Margaret Mead, lives upon newness indifference. One flower or a border blooms every... The gardener in England lives upon newness indifference. One flower or a border blooms earlier or later, and another is not there at all. The light catches on a new clump of larkspur, and the garden is made new. In a New Guinea, the dusty old woven basketry masks are hauled out of the attics of the men's houses and made new again with fresh feathers and bright flowers arranged in new combinations, with small, graceful painted birds of cord-like wood and poised lightly on swaying reed stems. The magician's paraphernalia are always freshly painted. He creates what he pulls from his hat is new, just now called into being. Ignoring old audience, creating new. Today's revolutionary movement began with an inspired use of newly invented LP record. Black humorists denied access to mass radio audiences, created LP audiences. Though some of these were large, they possess a sense of intimacy, even conspiracy, totally lacking in radio audiences. When Mort Saul and others later turned to TV, black humor died. Saul attributed this to political changes, but I wonder if another factor wasn't involved. Restricting information makes it highly explosive. while widely disseminating information neutralizes its effects. Declassifying the audience. The SDS regularly declassifies university files, and the FBI regularly declasses SDS meetings. Recently, the SDS rifled Harvard's files and published a letter from the dean to the president, written just after the faculty overwhelmingly voted to recommend that the administration deprive the ROTC of course credits and professional standing for those who taught it. Dean's letter confidently and informally advised the president that I disagree with many of the particulars and virtually all of the spirit of the resolution passed by my own faculty, and suggest 4 methods of circumventing the expressed will of his faculty in this manner. Publication of this letter created a whole new ballgame. Last year, Who's Who in the CIA, published in East Berlin, listed American agents by name, age, address, specialty, etc. Obviously, the communists know a lot about the CIA. Only Americans are kept ignorant, at least officially. But recently, the Los Angeles Free Press published sections from this register, which was originally compiled with the aid of Soviet intelligence. When Philby went over to the Russians, he declassified all he knew of Allied intelligence by publishing it in America. Fulbright sought to declassify the Tonkin Inlet incident by releasing it at home. There was no point in releasing it to the communists since they already knew every detail. An explosive that is tightly encased has far greater power than one openly exposed. This is often true of information, at least in terms of audience. When classified information is diffused, it's defused. This magazine about schools publishes items taken from school bulletin boards, infrastructure, intra-faculty memos, etc. Most beyond parody. 15 years ago, Explorations reprinted items lifted from the files of broadcasters and publishers. Example, Procter & Gamble's rules on TV censorship. Life Editor's instructions on creating news, etc. Printing this may have been illegal, but no action was ever brought. By declassifying the audience, the power of restricted information is neutralized, and those who once sought to control it are rendered impotent and clownish. Recently, one of California campus, the chancellor charged 2 senior faculty with misconduct during a demonstration. Evidence offered in support of one of the charges, all of which were labeled confidential, included testimony of a clerk who had searched wastepaper baskets. The defendants met this problem openly. They printed and widely disseminated the charges. They went further. They enlarged the paragraph on the wastepaper, snooping into posters, which they posted on trees about the campus. Almost immediately, the problem ceased to exist, having been publicly purged. In the end, everyone acted as if the whole event never really happened. One is reminded of Nixon purging himself on TV by converting a secret donation into public drama before a mass audience. In Prague, the Czechs reprinted, without change or comment, articles from Pravda dealing with the Russian takeover. Czechs read these as high comedy. Russian occupation leaders had to ask Pravda to lay off the nonsense. In other words, by declassifying information and making it available to those to whom it had hitherto been denied, an opposite effect was achieved. Humor as declassifier. One of Will Rogers' funniest acts was simply to read the daily newspaper aloud in a nightclub. Audiences were convulsed. Mort Saul's only prop was a copy of the Los Angeles Times. When Frank Sinatra played the tape of Nixon's 1962 farewell speech in a nightclub, the combination of speech and laughter was so funny, it was released as an LP record. Today, the yippies, instead of putting politics into the nightclub, put the nightclub into politics. When Jerry Rubin, dressed as Santa Claus with a plastic burp gun, appeared before the House UN Un-Americans Activities Committee, the comic nature of this committee was suddenly exposed. In less than an hour, the committee lost its identity. It tried to solve this by renaming itself. Translation. One of the most effective means of declassification is translation, for language is itself a classificatory system. When you translate one medium to another, you declassify. When you print an oral tradition, show a movie on TV, film Greek drama, or put a classroom lecture on TV, you declassify both content and medium and expose both to scrutiny. Recently in Houston, an artist announced a happening, complete with lights, sound, drama. After the audience had assembled, he wheeled a TV set on stage, plugged it in, turned it on, and left. The audience watched TV with growing uneasiness and, for many, growing awareness. Enthroning a new medium, dethroning an old. The appearance of any new medium leads to a shift in medial ratios, recasting the roles of all older media. Every culture has a primary medium for the classification of that culture's basic cliches. When a new medium replaces it, the old one is freed and takes up its role as declassifier. The coming of writing enabled one to say what one could not be written, and with the coming of print, one could write what couldn't be printed. The coming of films freed the stage for new and bolder drama, just as the appearance of TV freed films. The older medium is thus free to play a subversive role, much favored by artists, but deplored by those grown accustomed to speak with the voice of authority. The New York Times and Life magazine now find themselves uneasy in their roles as critics. Both before TV, both spoke in the name of the establishment. Emmett Hughes, editor of Life, was Eisenhower's chief speechwriter. His editorials and presidential speeches were identical. The New York Times knew of Kennedy's plan to build up forces in Vietnam, but chose, in the interest of national security, to minimize its coverage of this crucial event. James Reston knew of UT flights 14 months before the story broke. In the past, the White House felt free to confide to the establishment press. No more. Life now exposes corruption in government, and the New York Times no longer suppresses news on request from the White House. The White House is reported to share classified information now only with TV networks. Print has joined the declassifiers. The press has gone underground. go ahead and end that there, since we're at about an hour and 50 minutes or so. I hope you guys enjoyed this little reading. I still got quite a bit of book to get through, so come back and check it out later. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. We'll go through some more of this. I think that, well, honestly, I think every individual in the world could benefit from something like this. This book changed my perspective on life and reality and people and society and culture and why we do the things that we do.